I noticed the mashed potatoes before I noticed the way my daughter-in-law was smiling at me. And that was the first thing that felt wrong about my son's wedding day. Everything else had been planned down to the smallest detail. Every flower arrangement, every folded napkin, every place setting aligned just the way she wanted, and I had paid for most of it without ever asking for recognition, because I believed that was what mothers did. We built quietly, so our children could stand in something beautiful. The ballroom shimmered under warm lights, soft gold reflecting off glassware and polished silver, and guests were laughing, raising their glasses, complimenting the food, the music, the elegance of it all, and I sat there in my pale blue dress, the one Daniel once told me made me look just like home, holding my smile the way I had learned to hold so many things over the years. Emily stood across the table, her white gown perfect, her posture even more perfect, greeting guests with that effortless charm she wore like a second skin. But when her eyes landed on me, there was something else there, something sharper, something that didn't belong in a room filled with celebration. Earlier that morning, I had watched her direct the wedding planner with quiet authority, adjusting centerpieces, reassigning seats, making small changes that somehow always moved me just a little farther from the center of things. A different table, a different role, a softer introduction when she spoke about me, as if I were part of the background instead of the reason half the room existed. Daniel hadn't noticed, or maybe he had and chose not to, his attention orbiting entirely around his new wife, and I told myself it was natural, that this was how families shifted, how mothers stepped back so new bonds could take their place. But there is a difference between stepping back and being pushed aside, and I felt that difference settle quietly in my chest long before the dinner began. When the plates were set in front of us, steam rising gently, the scent of butter and herbs drifting upward, people leaned in with appreciation, complimenting the chef, complimenting Emily for her perfect taste. And she accepted every word with a soft laugh, a grateful nod, never once glancing in my direction. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so warm could feel so cold, that a room so full could feel so distant, and I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap, the way I had taught myself to do when words would only make things worse. Then she stepped closer to me, just a small movement, barely noticeable to anyone else, and she leaned in as if she were about to share something kind, something private, something meant only for me. And for a brief second, I allowed myself to believe that maybe I had been wrong about her, that maybe this was her way of reaching out, of including me, of acknowledging everything I had done. But her voice, when it came, was soft in a different way, not warm, not grateful, but precise, controlled, and unmistakably deliberate. And she said, "You should really try the food, Margaret. After all, you paid for it." And she smiled as she said it, that same polished smile she had shown the guests all evening, the same smile that made everyone believe she was gracious, thoughtful, perfect. I didn't move right away. I didn't look at Daniel. I didn't look at anyone, because in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time, something that had been building in quiet, invisible layers over months, maybe years, and suddenly it was all there, clear and undeniable. The laughter around the table continued, glasses clinked, someone told a joke, and no one seemed to notice the shift that had just happened, or maybe they did and chose not to see it, because it was easier that way. I reached for my glass of water instead, lifting it slowly, carefully, as if nothing at all had changed, as if I were still exactly where I was supposed to be, and I took a small sip, letting the silence settle where a response might have been. Daniel said nothing, not even a glance in my direction, and that silence spoke louder than anything else in the room. I placed the glass back down, folded my hands again, and kept my smile, because there is a kind of strength that doesn't raise its voice, that doesn't demand attention, that simply waits. And as I sat there, surrounded by a celebration I had built but no longer belonged to, I realized that Emily had just shown me exactly who she was, and more importantly, she had shown me exactly what she thought I was, and I let her believe it completely, because that was the first step and the biggest mistake she would make. 6 hours earlier, the ballroom had been quiet, almost sacred, like a place waiting to become something meaningful, and I remember standing near the center of it with my hands loosely clasped, watching the staff move carefully around the room, setting each table with the kind of precision that only exists before guests arrive. The linens were smooth, the glassware untouched, the air still holding that faint scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. And for a moment, I allowed myself to feel proud, not in a loud way, not in a way that needed recognition, but in that quiet, steady way that comes from knowing you helped build something beautiful for the people you love. I had written the checks weeks earlier, signed my name at the bottom of invoices I did not question, because when Daniel told me what they needed, I said yes without hesitation: the venue, the catering, the live band. Even the extra lighting Emily insisted would make the photographs feel more romantic. And I believed her, because I wanted everything to be perfect for them. I wanted this day to be something they would look back on and remember as the beginning of a life filled with warmth and stability. Emily had arrived shortly after me that morning, already dressed in a silk robe, her hair partially styled, her expression focused in a way that suggested she was managing something far larger than a wedding. And she moved through the room with quiet authority, giving instructions in a calm voice that no one questioned, adjusting the placement of chairs, repositioning centerpieces by inches, correcting the angle of place cards, as if every detail carried weight. When she reached my table, she paused, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the card with my name on it. And without looking at me, she shifted it slightly farther from the center, just a small movement, almost invisible, but enough that I noticed. I did not say anything. I simply watched her hand move away, watched her continue on as if nothing had happened, and I told myself it was nothing, just part of her attention to detail, just another adjustment in a long list of adjustments. But something about the way she avoided my eyes stayed with me. Daniel arrived later, his suit neatly pressed, his expression brighter than I had seen in months, and he greeted me with a quick hug, warm but brief, already half turned toward Emily before I could say anything more than, "You look handsome." And I stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching the way he leaned toward her, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the way she nodded, without really listening, as if she already knew what he would say. Throughout the morning, I noticed small things that did not seem important on their own, but began to form a pattern when placed side by side. Conversations that ended when I approached, decisions that had already been made before I was informed, a seating chart that positioned me among distant relatives rather than near the family table, and each time, I chose silence. Not because I did not notice, but because I had spent years believing that patience was a form of strength, that giving space was a form of love. At one point, the wedding planner approached me with a folder of final confirmations, her smile polite but uncertain, and she asked me to review a few last details regarding payments. And as I flipped through the pages, I saw my name repeated again and again, attached to numbers that reflected every corner of the day. And I realized that my presence was everywhere in that room except where it mattered most. When I handed the folder back, I thanked her, because that is what I do. I thank people, even when the gratitude feels misplaced. And as she walked away, I looked around the ballroom once more, at the tables that would soon be filled, at the stage where the band would play, at the dance floor where my son would begin his new life, and I felt something shift quietly inside me. Not pain exactly, not anger, but a kind of clarity that settles in without asking permission, and I understood then that this day was never really about me, not even in the ways I had imagined. And as the doors opened and the first guests began to arrive, carrying laughter and expectation into the space, I stepped back, just slightly, into a place where I could observe without being seen, and I stayed there, watching, learning, waiting. By the time the guests had filled every seat and the music began to weave its way through the room, I had already learned where to place myself so that I would not be in anyone's way, not too close to the center, not too visible, just present enough to be acknowledged when necessary, and invisible enough to be forgotten when it was convenient. I sat at my assigned table, smiling when spoken to, nodding politely as distant relatives commented on how beautiful everything looked, how lucky Daniel was, how Emily had such impeccable taste, and I agreed with all of them, because disagreeing would have required explaining something I was not yet ready to put into words. From where I sat, I could see the head table clearly, the way Emily leaned slightly toward Daniel as she laughed, the way she reached for his hand with effortless confidence, as if she had always belonged there, and perhaps she had. Perhaps I was the one who had misunderstood my place all along. There was a moment when one of Daniel's old friends approached me, holding a glass of champagne, and he said, "You must be so proud. This is an incredible wedding." And I thanked him, my voice steady, my smile practiced, and he added, almost as an afterthought, "Emily really outdid herself." And I nodded again, because correcting him would have required a conversation that no one had come here to have. As the evening moved forward, small details continued to reveal themselves, not loudly, not dramatically, but in ways that felt deliberate, the kind of deliberate that hides behind politeness, like the way my name was mentioned only briefly during the welcome speech, grouped together with family support, instead of acknowledged for what it truly was, or the way the photographer directed family photos without ever asking where I should stand, placing me at the edge of the frame, slightly behind others, as if I were an optional presence rather than a central one. Daniel did not notice, or if he did not say anything, and I began to understand that silence can take many forms. Sometimes it is absence, and sometimes it is agreement. During dinner, I watched as servers moved gracefully between tables, placing plates in front of each guest with careful precision, and when they reached me, the young man hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing toward Emily before setting my plate down, as if confirming that I was indeed supposed to be served. And I caught that look, that small moment of uncertainty, and it told me more than any words could have. Across the room, I saw Emily speaking quietly with the event coordinator, her expression calm, controlled, and I wondered how many conversations like that had happened without my knowledge, how many decisions had been made that shaped this evening in ways I was only beginning to understand. I picked up my fork, then set it back down, not because I was not hungry, but because something about the act felt misplaced, as if participating fully would require a kind of belonging I no longer felt. Laughter rose and fell around me. Glasses clinked. Music softened into something slower, more intimate, and couples began to move toward the dance floor, drawn together by a rhythm that promised connection, and I watched them, not with envy, but with a quiet distance, like someone observing a life they once recognized but no longer inhabited. At one point, Daniel passed by my table, close enough that I could have reached out and touched his sleeve, and for a brief second, I thought he might stop, might look at me, might say something simple like, "Are you okay?" But he kept walking, his attention already elsewhere, and I let my hand remain still, resting lightly against the edge of the table, because reaching out would have changed nothing. Instead, I sat there and allowed the realization to settle fully, not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, steady understanding that this evening had been carefully arranged, not just in its decorations and its schedule, but in its dynamics, in its hierarchy, in the subtle ways people were positioned and perceived. And I knew then that what had happened later at the table was not an isolated moment, not an accident, not a misunderstanding, but the natural conclusion of something that had been building long before the first guest arrived, and I had been watching it unfold all day, piece by piece, without fully naming it, until now. It happened so quietly that for a second, I thought I had imagined it, the way Emily's voice lowered, just enough to stay between us while still being carried by the rhythm of the room. The way her smile never changed even as her words settled into something colder than the air around us. I could feel the warmth of the meal in front of me, the soft rise of steam, the faint scent of butter, and I became suddenly aware of how carefully everything had been arranged, not just the table, but the moment itself, as if this was not spontaneous at all, but something placed precisely where it could not be, ignored and yet could easily be dismissed by anyone who chose not to see it. I did not look at her immediately. I let a small pause exist between what she said and what I allowed myself to understand, because there is a difference between hearing something and accepting what it means, and I needed that second, that quiet space, to see clearly. When I finally lifted my eyes, she was already looking past me, already engaging with someone else, her attention shifting with effortless ease, as if nothing at all had happened, as if I were simply another detail in the room, something to be adjusted and then forgotten. Around us, the evening continued without interruption. Laughter rose and fell, silverware touched plates with soft, rhythmic sounds, and somewhere in the distance, the band transitioned into a slower song, drawing couples toward the dance floor. and I realized how perfectly timed it all was. How easily this moment could dissolve into the larger movement of the night. Unnoticed, unchallenged, unspoken, I glanced toward Daniel then. Not quickly, not urgently, just enough to see where he stood. And he was there, close enough to have heard if he had been listening. But his attention was elsewhere, focused on a conversation, on a smile that did not include me. And I understood that even if he had heard, it would not have changed anything. Because sometimes silence is not confusion, it is choice. I placed my hands neatly on the edge of the table, steady, composed. And I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not even hurt in the way I might have expected, but a kind of clarity that removes doubt, that sharpens everything into something undeniable. For years, I had explained away small things, the missed calls, the changed plans, the polite distance, telling myself that families evolve, that roles shift, that love does not always look the same as it once did. But sitting there, in that carefully curated celebration, I could see the pattern for what it was, not random, not accidental, but intentional, built piece by piece until it reached this moment. I picked up my fork, then set it back down again, not because I was unsure, but because I realized that reacting in the way she expected would only confirm the role she had already assigned to me, and I was no longer willing to stand inside that definition. Instead, I reached for my glass of water once more, taking a small, measured sip, allowing the calm to remain visible, allowing the silence to speak in a way words never could. Across the table, someone asked Emily a question about the menu, and she responded with ease, explaining the choices, the flavors, the thought behind each detail. And I listened as she spoke, not to her words, but to the confidence behind them, the certainty that she controlled not just the evening, but the narrative itself. And in that moment, I understood something that changed everything. She did not see me as someone who would respond. She saw me as someone who would endure, someone who would remain quiet, someone who would accept whatever place she was given. And that belief, that quiet assumption, was the foundation of everything she had done. I let my gaze drift across the room, taking in the lights, the movement, the carefully constructed beauty of it all, and I realized that for the first time that day, I was no longer trying to belong within it. I was observing it from the outside, seeing it clearly, without the weight of expectation, and that distance, that quiet separation, gave me something I had not had before, perspective. I folded my hands again, resting them lightly in my lap, and I kept my expression exactly the same, calm, composed, unchanged, because there is a kind of strength that does not reveal itself immediately, that waits, that listens, that gathers what it needs before it moves. And as the music continued and the room carried on as if nothing had shifted, I allowed her to believe that she had defined this moment, that she had determined its meaning, because that belief would matter later, far more than anything I could have said right then. I stayed seated for a few moments longer, long enough for the rhythm of the room to continue without me, long enough for my stillness to blend into the background of everything else that was happening. And then I reached for my napkin, folded it carefully, and placed it beside my plate with the same quiet precision I had used all day. No one stopped me as I pushed my chair back, the soft sound barely noticeable beneath the music and conversation. And when I stood, I did not rush, I did not hesitate. I simply adjusted my dress and began to walk, each step steady, measured, as if I had somewhere specific to be, even though the truth was I was stepping away from something I no longer needed to remain part of. As I moved through the tables, I could feel eyes pass over me without settling, guests absorbed in their own conversations, their own celebrations. And I realized how easy it is to disappear in a room full of people when no one is truly looking for you. Near the edge of the ballroom, one of the staff members gave me a polite nod, holding the door open just slightly, and I returned the gesture with a small smile, the kind that requires no explanation, and I stepped into the hallway where the noise softened instantly, replaced by a quieter, more honest silence. The air felt different there, cooler, less curated, and for the first time that evening, I allowed my shoulders to lower just a fraction, not in defeat, but in release, as if I had been holding something in place all night and no longer needed to. I walked slowly toward the exit, passing framed mirrors that reflected the version of me I had presented to the room, composed, calm, untouched, and I paused for a moment to look at that reflection, not to question it, but to recognize it, because it had served its purpose exactly as intended. Outside, the evening air carried a faint chill, the kind that settles into your skin without warning, and I wrapped my arms lightly around myself, not out of discomfort, but out of habit, a gesture I had made countless times over the years without thinking. The parking lot was quiet, the distant sound of music barely reaching me. Now, and I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, allowing the distance between me and the ballroom to grow, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, completely. I did not feel the urge to go back inside, not even to explain my absence, because explanations are only necessary when someone is expecting them, and I understood now that no one was. Instead, I reached into my purse and took out my phone, holding it in my hand without unlocking it, simply feeling its weight, its presence, as if reminding myself that I still had control over something, even if it was small. Earlier that day, I had ignored several calls, messages that could wait, conversations that did not feel urgent, but now, standing there in the quiet, I found myself thinking differently, not about what had just happened, but about everything that had led up to it, every small adjustment, every overlooked moment, every silence that had been easier to accept than to question. I scrolled through my contacts slowly, not searching for comfort, not searching for validation, but for clarity, for the one person who would understand without needing the entire story, someone who knew me before all of this, before the quiet compromises, before the careful distance. I stopped when I saw the name I was looking for, and for a second, I did nothing, letting the decision settle fully, because once I moved forward, there would be no returning to the version of things I had just left behind. Inside, the music continued, the celebration carried on, and I imagined Emily smiling, Daniel laughing, the guests raising their glasses, unaware that anything had shifted at all, and that was exactly how it needed to be. I finally pressed the call button, lifting the phone to my ear, and as it began to ring, I felt something steady within me, not anger, not sadness, but direction. The kind that comes when you stop asking where you belong and start deciding where you will go next. And I waited, calm and certain, knowing that this quiet step, this small decision made outside a brightly lit room, would matter far more than anything that had just happened inside it. The call was answered on the third ring, and I recognized his voice immediately, steady, familiar, unchanged in a way that made something inside me settle even further. "Margaret, I was not expecting to hear from you tonight," he said, and I could hear the quiet concern beneath his calm tone, the kind that does not rush to conclusions but does not ignore the moment either. I did not explain everything, not right away, because some things do not need to be spoken in detail to be understood, and I simply said, "Are you still at your office, Thomas?" And there was a brief pause before he replied, "Yes, I am, and I will be here as long as you need." And that was enough. I told him I would be there shortly, then ended the call without hesitation, because once a decision is made clearly, there is no need to linger in it. The drive across town was quiet, the streets lit by soft yellow lights that blurred slightly against the windshield, and I kept my hands steady on the wheel, my thoughts not racing, not scattered, but aligning themselves in a way that felt almost inevitable, as if this path had been waiting for me long before I chose to take it. I passed familiar places along the way, restaurants Daniel used to love as a child, the park where we spent Sunday afternoons when life was simpler, and I realized how easily memories can anchor you to a version of people that no longer exists, how they can keep you standing still long after everything else has moved on. When I arrived at Thomas's office, the building was nearly empty, the lobby quiet except for the faint hum of overhead lights, and I took the elevator up without hesitation, watching the numbers change slowly, each one marking a step further away from the person I had been earlier that evening. He was waiting when the doors opened, standing just inside his office, his jacket neatly pressed, his expression attentive but not intrusive, and he did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply gestured for me to sit and said, "Tell me what you need." And that was when I understood exactly why I had come. I did not describe the dinner. I did not repeat the words that had been said, because none of that mattered in the way it might have before. Instead, I spoke in clear, measured terms, outlining what needed to change, what needed to be secured, what needed to be removed from their reach. And as I spoke, I could see the shift in his posture, the way he listened more closely, the way he began to take notes without interrupting. "Are you certain?" he asked at one point, not as a challenge, but as a confirmation, and I met his eyes and said, "I am," without hesitation, because certainty is not something that appears suddenly. It is something that builds quietly until there is no room left for doubt. We went through everything carefully: accounts, property, future allocations, each detail examined with precision, not rushed, not emotional, just deliberate. And I felt no need to justify my decisions, no need to explain the reasons behind them, because they were already understood, even if unspoken. At one point, he paused, his pen resting lightly against the paper, and said, "This will change things significantly." And I nodded, because that was the point: not to create chaos, not to seek revenge in the way people often imagine it, but to restore balance, to ensure that what had been taken for granted would no longer be available so easily. When we finished, he organized the documents neatly, sliding them across the desk for my review, and I read through each page slowly, not because I doubted him, but because I needed to see it for myself, to recognize the shift in something tangible, something real. I signed where necessary, my hand steady, my name clear and deliberate. And when I placed the pen down, I felt a quiet finality settle into place. Not an ending, but a transition, the kind that does not announce itself loudly but changes everything all the same. As I stood to leave, Thomas walked me to the door, his voice calm as he said, "If anything else comes up, you call me." And I nodded, knowing that I would not hesitate if it did. Outside, the night had deepened, the air cooler now, and I took a slow breath before stepping forward, no longer carrying the weight I had brought with me, because it had been replaced with something far more useful: clarity. And as I walked toward my car, I realized that for the first time that day, I was no longer reacting to what had been done to me. I was deciding what would happen next. The next morning arrived without noise, without urgency, just a quiet shift in light through the curtains, the kind of morning that does not announce itself but simply exists. And I woke before the alarm, not because I had not slept, but because there was nothing left in me that needed rest from the night before. I moved through my kitchen slowly, making coffee the same way I always had, measuring, pouring, waiting, each step familiar, each motion steady. And I realized how grounding routine can be when everything else has changed, how it gives you a place to stand while the rest of your world rearranges itself. My phone sat on the counter beside me, silent at first, and I did not reach for it right away, because I already knew what would be there: messages that would arrive too late, words that would attempt to soften something that had already hardened into clarity. When I finally picked it up, the screen lit with notifications, Daniel's name appearing more than once, a voicemail, 2 missed calls, and a message that simply read, "Mom, where did you go last night?" And I looked at it for a moment longer than necessary, not because I was unsure of how to respond, but because I understood that whatever I said next would define everything that followed. I set the phone back down without replying, not out of anger, not out of avoidance, but because silence, when chosen deliberately, carries more meaning than any immediate answer. Instead, I sat at the table with my coffee, the warmth of the mug steady in my hands, and I let my thoughts move through the previous day without resistance, not replaying the moment at the table, not focusing on the words themselves, but on everything surrounding them, the structure of it, the intention behind it, the certainty Emily had carried into that moment. And I saw it clearly now, not as an isolated act, but as part of a pattern that had been building quietly, consistently, without interruption. Later that morning, the phone rang again, and this time I answered, not because I felt compelled to, but because I was ready to hear what would be said. And Daniel's voice came through quickly, slightly strained. "Mom, I have been trying to reach you. You left without saying anything. Are you okay?" And I listened to him without interrupting, allowing the question to exist exactly as he had asked it. When he finished, I paused for a brief moment, not for effect, but to ensure that what I said next was as measured as everything else I had done, and I replied, "I am fine, Daniel," my voice calm, even, unchanged. And there was a silence on the other end, the kind that follows when someone expects more and does not receive it. "Emily said you seemed upset," he added, carefully, as if choosing his words. and I could hear it then. Not concern, but alignment, the subtle shift that confirmed everything I had already understood. I did not correct him. I did not explain. I simply said, "The wedding was beautiful," and let the sentence stand on its own, because sometimes the absence of detail reveals more than the presence of it. He hesitated, then said, "We should talk later," and I responded, "We will," before ending the call, not abruptly, not harshly, just with the same quiet finality I had carried since the night before. As I placed the phone back on the table, I felt no urgency to fill the silence that followed. No need to reach out again. No need to clarify anything further, because clarity had already been established where it mattered. Outside, the day continued as it always does. Cars passing, neighbors moving through their routines, the world unchanged in ways that can feel almost disorienting when something inside you has shifted so completely. And I sat there for a while longer, finishing my coffee, feeling the calm settle deeper, not as something temporary, but as something rooted, something steady. By the time I stood to begin the rest of my day, I understood that what had started as a moment at a table had already moved far beyond that. It had become a turning point, quiet, controlled, and entirely mine, and whatever came next would not be shaped by what they expected, but by what I had already decided. 3 days passed before I heard from them again, and in those 3 days, I did not reach out. I did not explain. I did not revisit the moment in my mind the way I once might have, because there was nothing left to analyze, nothing left to question, only decisions that had already been made and set quietly into motion. When the message finally came, it was not from Daniel, but from Emily. Short and carefully worded, asking if I could meet for lunch, her tone polite, almost warm, as if the distance between us could be softened with the right choice of words, and I read it once. Then again, not for meaning, but for intention, because intention is always clearer when you stop looking at what is said and start noticing what is missing. I agreed to meet, not because I felt obligated, but because I understood that some moments are not meant to be avoided. They are meant to be seen fully, from a place where you are no longer affected by them. The restaurant she chose was quiet, understated, the kind of place where conversations are meant to stay contained. And when I arrived, she was already there, seated by the window, her posture composed, her expression neutral but attentive. And as I approached, she stood with a small smile, the same smile she had worn at the wedding, practiced, effortless, controlled. "Margaret, I am so glad you came," she said, her voice smooth, and I returned the greeting with the same level of calm, taking my seat across from her without hesitation. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence settling naturally, not uncomfortable, not strained, just present, and I could see her assessing me, measuring something she could not quite define, perhaps expecting a reaction that was no longer available to her. She began carefully, speaking about the wedding, about how stressful it had been, how emotions run high during events like that, how things can be misunderstood, and I listened without interrupting, allowing her to construct her version of the moment, to place it gently into a narrative that removed intention and replaced it with circumstance. When she finished, she looked at me as if waiting for something, an acceptance, a reassurance, a return to the balance she believed still existed, and I met her gaze steadily, not challenging, not confrontational, simply present. "It was a very well-organized event," I said, my voice even, and I saw a flicker of confusion cross her face, subtle, brief, but unmistakable, because it was not the response she had prepared for. She leaned slightly forward then, her tone shifting just enough to reveal a hint of impatience beneath the surface, and she asked, "Is that all you have to say?" And I held her gaze for a moment longer before replying, "For now, yes," and let the words settle between us without explanation. The waiter approached, taking our orders, and the conversation moved on in a way that appeared normal to anyone observing. But beneath it, I could feel the imbalance she was beginning to sense, the lack of control, the absence of reaction, the quiet space where she had expected resistance. And as we sat there, discussing small things that carried no real weight, I understood that she had come, expecting to manage the situation, to guide it back into something familiar, something she could navigate. But what she had not yet realized was that the structure she relied on no longer existed. and she was now moving within something entirely different, something she did not yet understand, but would soon feel the full shape of. A week later, I invited them both to my house, not for a confrontation, not for a discussion, but for something that felt, on the surface, entirely ordinary. And when Daniel arrived with Emily beside him, they stepped inside with the same ease they always had, as if nothing had changed, as if the foundation beneath everything remained exactly as they remembered it. I greeted them calmly, offering coffee, guiding them into the living room where the afternoon light settled softly across the furniture, and for a moment, we sat in a silence that felt almost familiar, the kind that exists in families that believe they understand one another. Daniel spoke first, his tone careful. "Mom, we wanted to talk about the other night." And I nodded slightly, not encouraging, not dismissing, simply allowing the moment to unfold at its own pace, while Emily remained composed beside him, her posture straight, her expression controlled, though I could see the faint tension in the way her hands rested too still in her lap. I reached for the folder I had placed on the table earlier, sliding it gently toward them without a word, and Daniel glanced at it briefly before looking back at me, confusion beginning to replace the certainty he had carried into the room. "What is this?" he asked, and I met his eyes steadily, my voice calm as I said, "Something important you should both understand," and I watched as he opened it, his expression shifting gradually as he read, the lines of confidence softening into something less certain, something unsettled. Emily leaned closer, her composure tightening as her eyes moved quickly across the pages, and I could see the moment she realized what she was looking at, not because she said anything, but because the stillness she had been holding began to change, becoming sharper, more rigid, as if she were trying to regain control over something that was no longer within her reach. The room remained quiet. No raised voices, no sudden movements, just the soft sound of paper as Daniel turned another page, and I let the silence do its work, because there was nothing I needed to add, nothing I needed to explain. Everything they needed to know was already in front of them. "You changed everything," Daniel said finally, his voice lower now, not angry, but uncertain, and I inclined my head slightly, acknowledging the truth in his words without offering justification. Because justification is only necessary when you doubt your own decisions, and I did not. Emily looked up. Then, her expression no longer smooth, her voice measured but edged with something she could not fully conceal. "This does not seem fair," she said, and I held her gaze for a moment before replying. "Fairness is not something that appears when it is convenient. It is something that is recognized when it has been absent for too long." And I let the words settle between us without raising my tone, without shifting my posture. Because calm carries weight in ways that anger never can. Daniel closed the folder slowly, his hands no longer as steady as they had been, and I could see the realization forming, not all at once, but piece by piece, as he began to understand that the structure he had relied on, the quiet assumption that everything would always remain available to him, had changed. No one argued, no one demanded, because there was nothing left to negotiate, only something to accept, and acceptance, when it comes this way, rarely arrives with comfort. I stood then, smoothing the fabric of my dress, not as a signal for them to leave, but as a quiet acknowledgement that the conversation had reached its natural end. And as I looked at them, I felt no satisfaction in the way people often imagine, no sense of victory, only a steady, grounded certainty that I had finally placed everything where it belonged. "You are both welcome here," I said, my voice even. "But things will be different now." And I let that be the only explanation I offered, because anything more would have diminished the clarity of what had already been understood. They left not long after, the door closing behind them with a soft finality, and I remained where I was for a moment, listening to the quiet settle back into the room, the same quiet that had always been there. Only now it felt different, not empty, not uncertain, but complete. And as I turned away, moving through my home with a calm I had not felt in years, I realized that the moment at that table had not taken anything from me. It had revealed everything I needed to see, and what I chose to do with that truth had changed far more than they ever expected.